came back, he besieged it and then squashed it, crushed it, burned it, and took that temple apart stone by stone so there wasn't
me full. But the amazing part is I was a very active child. So one of the ways she kept me quiet is that she started to teach me how to read and write. By the time we got out of the apartment when I was 5 years old, I could read and write in 2 languages. Wow. So she kept me busy by teaching me how to read and write. I went back to Bucharest in 1969. I visited the apartment. Georgiu was dead, but his wife Katya and his daughter were still there. She recognized me because I looked like my father, and I asked her who lived in our old apartment, and she told her this was a lady who was a very high member of the Romanian Communist Party, and she said to me, in no disrespect to cat lovers, that she had about a dozen cats who lived up there with her, and when she opened the door, I may get knocked back because it was the days before kitty litter. So my cousin was with me, and we went up there, and I pretended I didn't speak Romanian. My cousin told her that my parents used to live in this apartment, and of course she denied that anybody else had ever lived there. When you looked at the side of the doorpost, you could still see the sign of the mezuzah that was on the door. So after a little currency exchanged hands, she let me in. I looked around. Some things I recognized, some things I didn't recognize. From there, I went to Poland. I went to Auschwitz, and I walked in under the sign that in German said, Arbeit macht frei, work will free you. And I went to one of these mounds. I didn't know if it was my grandparents or wasn't, who it was. I covered my head, put on a Jewish prayer shawl, a talit, and recited Kaddish. From there, I went to Israel. And let me tell you, I was single in those days, and I had a very good time in Israel. But outside of...
Some married people now go and have a very good time.
I'm not going to go there.
Not us.
But outside of Yad Vashem, the museum in Jerusalem, there is a grove of trees dedicated to the righteous Gentiles. Oskar Schindler, Raoul Wallenberg, the Japanese consul Shirogase, who gave false documents to Jews. And I planted a tree in Georgiu's honor. So he is now among the righteous in Jerusalem. But before I left Romania, I took Katya and her daughter. Romania was a poor country under Ceausescu. People were hungry. But they had stores that you could only shop in with so-called hard currency. Dollars, pounds, francs, rubles. And I took Katya to one of these stores, and when we walked in, the lady started to scream that we didn't belong there. So I reached into my pocket and went like this. And when she saw the God Almighty American dollar, and even those days it even had some buying power, she says, "Oh, come on in." So I told Katya to buy everything that she needed and to buy everything that she didn't need. And that was my way of saying thank you. Yes, ma'am.
What was the name of the man that lives in Lyon, France?
Albert Vaside. Let me get you the spelling of that. Veisssid.
Thank you. We have a friend whose daughter and her husband are missionaries there, and she's an author. And this might be an excellent new idea for her next story. She might have to talk to you because she's an Atlanta.
Okay, I'll be happy to talk to her. Yes, ma'am.
I was taught that Hitler's mother was a Jew.
False.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a myth that Holocaust deniers like to perpetrate. Because they want to say, look, after all, he was part Jewish and he did this to his people. He wasn't. His real name was Schnickelgruber. Okay. He had there was, as far as research goes, and trust me, Yad Vashem did a lot of research into it. There's no evidence whatsoever that Adolf Hitler had any drop of Jewish blood in him. It is something that the deniers and people who like that like to say that, after all, he did it to his own people.
I was taught this in high school. But the teacher who taught us this made us sit for weeks and played these newsreels that Mr. Eisenhower took. And he said, "You will know."
Interesting.
The interesting part is that General Patton was with him. And General Patton got so upset that he took out his guns and wanted to shoot every SS that they could find on the base. Unfortunately, he was stopped from that. But that was George B. Patton. He was not one of the most calmest human beings in the world. But yes, those movies were taken,
Yes.
and they're there. They're there.
I read Mr. Eisenhower's, I read Ike, the book Ike, I think it was about that. And they said, I mean, Ike was just serious about this stuff.
There was the whole thing was we didn't know.
There's a book I read part of, I couldn't read the whole thing, the Nuremberg interviews, and it wasn't the top tier, but interviews that they did, psychologists did with some of the others, and there was the guy who developed Auschwitz. And he was just this picture, this little meek, mild guy, and it was just this problem he had to solve, and they tried doing it with the bus, and then they tried doing this, and you just don't know how long it takes to burn bodies. And, because the oil in the skin, and that's why it probably still smelled, was the ash, it was full of human fat. And just this mechanical problem, he really didn't see any problem with the whole thing. It was just a problem to be solved, that he had to report and get his numbers in right. And it's just, most of them were that way, it was just they didn't understand what this big fuss was.
The
very
Zyklon B gas was manufactured by the IG Farben Company, which is still in existence in Germany today. So a lot of these companies who say that they were just doing this for science and things like that, Mercedes used slave laborers, Daimler-Benz used slave labor at some of these camps. There was very few companies in Germany that were not part of this genocide, this Holocaust. Being Jewish, and you saw it in the movie, we always say that I lost 6 million of my fellow human beings. But I would be remiss in telling you that there were 5 million non-Jews who
Dr.
were also
Cooper,
married
our
in these camps.
pastor, often comments about, he's commented about it, yes.
The first group that were used were the mentally and physically handicapped. Jehovah's Witnesses, communists, homosexuals, anyone who was in opposition to the Nazis were sent to these camps and murdered. One of my favorite quotes, and let me see if I still have it back here. Yes, I do. Is from the Reverend Martin Niemöller. The Reverend Niemöller was a Protestant minister who spent 6 years in Nazi concentration camps. And he says, first they came for the communists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the Catholics, and I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. Then they came for me, and by that time, there was no one left to speak up for me. So what we try to do down at the Bremen is to teach these young people not to be bystanders. So, yes, sir.
Can I've read somewhere where it stated that IBM was involved in the numbering. They were behind that. Is that correct?
That's so yes, it is.